December 30th, 1609. Cachtice Castle, Hungary. Count György Thurso and his men burst through the castle doors on orders from King Matthias II. What they claim to find is horrific. Dead and dying young women. Evidence of torture. Bodies hidden throughout the castle. The woman responsible? Countess Elizabeth Báthory de said, one of the most powerful nobles in Hungary. After collecting testimony from 300 witnesses, Thurso determines that Bathory has tortured and killed more than 600 victims. The highest number cited is 650, though this comes from a claim by a servant that Bathory's court official had seen the figure in one of her private books. The book is never found. The Blood Countess, history's most prolific female serial killer. A monster who bathed in the blood of virgins to stay young. Or so the story goes. But here's what modern historians are discovering. This powerful woman might have been the victim of politically motivated slander that allowed relatives and the king to seize her lands and erase massive debts. This is the story of Elizabeth Báthory, but it's also the story of how we can never be certain which version is true. A powerful woman in a dangerous time, 1560 to 1604. Elizabeth Báthory was born August 7th, 1560, into prominent Protestant nobility in Hungary. Her family controlled Transylvania, and her uncle, Stephen Bathory, was King of Poland. In 1575, at age 15, she married Count Ferenc Nadasdy, a member of another powerful Hungarian family. The wedding was one of the most impressive events of the century. They moved to Castle Cachtice, a wedding gift from the Nadasdy family. From 1585 to 1595, Bathory bore 4 children. While her husband fought wars against the Ottoman Turks, Elizabeth managed their vast estates. She was educated, multilingual, and powerful, running multiple castles and thousands of acres of land. In 1602, a priest wrote a letter that discussed the excessive cruelty exhibited by Bathory and her husband towards their servants. This is important. Complaints about her treatment of servants exist before her husband's death. But abuse of lower classes by nobles was frowned upon, but not actually prohibited by law. Then in 1604, Ferenc Nadasdy dies. After Nadasdy's death, rumors of Bathory's cruelty begin to surface. Elizabeth is now a wealthy widow controlling enormous estates. She's powerful, independent, and according to some historians, that makes her dangerous to the wrong people. The accusations emerge, 1604 to 1610. According to the accusations, Bathory's initial targets were servant girls aged between 10 and 14, daughters of local peasants lured to the estate by offers of work as maids. The testimony describes horrific torture methods: burning with hot irons, beatings, needles under fingernails, being left outside in winter to freeze. The accounts are disturbing and detailed. For years, these deaths allegedly go unnoticed or unremarked. Bathory appeared to have tortured or killed peasants for years. Their disappearances were not likely to provoke an investigation. But then, she makes a fatal mistake, if the accusations are true. She eventually began killing daughters of the lesser gentry, some of whom were sent to live with her hoping to learn from her and benefit from a connection to the high-ranking countess. Killing serfs and servants was gauche, but not really illegal for a noble. Killing your fellow nobles, even ones of lower rank, was a far more serious problem, and not one that could be ignored. In 1610, King Matthias II of Hungary orders an investigation, the raid and trial, 1610 to 1611. On December 30th, 1609, Bathory and her servants were arrested. Count Gheorghe Thurzo, Bathory's own cousin, leads the raid. What did they find? The accounts vary. Some say they found dead and dying girls, bodies hidden in walls, evidence of ongoing torture. Others suggest the physical evidence was less clear than later claimed. The servants were put on trial in 1611, and 3 were executed. 2 female servants were condemned to have their fingers torn off by the executioner before being burnt alive. A male servant was beheaded and his body burnt. These servants denied their culpability in the murders, but admitted to burying multiple victims, though the number in their accounts varied between 36 and 51. But here's the problem. The fact that Bathory's servants were tortured makes their confessions unreliable. One witness stated that Bathory herself had listed 650 victims in her papers, but the testimony that Bathory had listed 650 victims was a second-hand accounting of what a court official had discovered. Yet the official who'd supposedly seen this information didn't testify. Of 289 witness accounts, more than 250 offered either hearsay or no information whatsoever. And Bathory herself? Although never tried, Bathory was confined to her chambers at Castle Cachtice. She was walled into her rooms, with only small openings for food and air. She remained there until she died in 1614, at age 54. The most notorious female serial killer in history was never actually tried for her crimes. The legend grows. After Bathory's death, the legends explode. Stories spread throughout Europe about the Blood Countess who bathed in virgin's blood to stay young. But here's the crucial fact. The first written account of her bathing in the blood didn't come out till a century after she died. The publishing of witness accounts in 1817 showed that the stories of Bathory's blood drinking or bathing were legend rather than fact. None of the trial testimony mentions bloodbaths. That detail is added later, by storytellers, by people who want to make the story more dramatic. The vampire connection, also invented later. Stories about Bathory's vampiric tendencies were based on rumors and only recorded as supposedly factual over a century after her death. Over centuries, Elizabeth Báthory becomes a cultural icon, the female Dracula, the ultimate female monster. Her story appears in over 120 novels, films, operas, and video games. But how much of what we know is actually true? The conspiracy theory. Modern historians have raised serious questions about Bathory's guilt, not because they think she was innocent, but because the evidence has major problems. The fact that a large debt owed by Matthias to Bathory was cancelled by her family in exchange for permitting them to manage her captivity suggests that the acts attributed to her were politically motivated slander. Habsburg ruler King Matthias II owed a large debt to Bathory and so benefited from her demise. The king also viewed her as a political threat who might support her cousin Gabriel Bathory's efforts to challenge Matthias II's control of Western Hungary. The Countess' imprisonment helped not just rivals, but also those close to her. Once Bathory was jailed, one of her daughters took valuables from her property, while her sons-in-law were keen to gain their inheritance without having to wait for her to die. Think about the timing. A wealthy, powerful widow with vast estates, a king who owes her money, ambitious relatives who want her inheritance, political rivals who see her as a threat. And suddenly, she's accused of being history's most prolific serial killer. The charges leveled against Bathory have been described by several historians as a witch hunt. Though importantly, she wasn't charged with witchcraft. She was charged with murder. But the process resembles a witch hunt. Lots of testimony, much of it hearsay, extracted through torture. Some researchers believe that as a wealthy and powerful woman in late Renaissance Europe, she herself may have been the victim. What can we actually know? So what's the truth? Was Elizabeth Báthory a sadistic serial killer? Or a powerful woman destroyed by political conspiracy? The honest answer, we can't be certain. Here's what we know for sure. Bodies were buried at her estates. Multiple witnesses testified against her. Her servants confessed, though under torture. In 1602, a priest wrote about the excessive cruelty exhibited by Bathory and her husband towards their servants. However, it's possible Bathory was not guilty of all the crimes that have been laid at her feet. The testimony against Bathory could have included true tales about how harshly she acted with lower classes. Such acts weren't illegal at the time. Bathory was only punished because her victims were said to have included noble women. Maybe she was cruel to servants, which was common among nobles. Maybe she even caused deaths through harsh treatment and negligence. But did she systematically torture and murder 650 young women? That number comes from a book that was never produced, from testimony that's second-hand, from confessions extracted through torture. One analysis concluded that there was no gender-based conspiracy against the Countess because early modern Hungary did not see wealthy widows as a threat. The trial followed standard procedures of the time. But other scholars disagree. Modern research indicates that Bathory, a powerful woman, might have been the target of politically motivated slander that allowed relatives to appropriate her lands. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Maybe she was cruel, but not as monstrously cruel as claimed. Maybe the accusations were partly true and partly exaggerated for political gain. We'll never know for certain. The final verdict. So here's what we're left with. Elizabeth Báthory died in 1614, walled up in her castle, never having faced trial. The accusations against her: torturing and killing up to 650 young women. The evidence: testimony from 300 witnesses, much of it second-hand. Confessions from servants who were tortured. A book listing victims that was never produced. Bodies found at her estates. The political context: a wealthy widow, a king in debt to her, ambitious relatives, power struggles over Hungarian territory. The legend: bloodbaths, vampirism, the most prolific female serial killer in history, all added decades or centuries after her death. The reality? We can't be certain. Depending on the account, Hungarian Countess Elizabeth Báthory was either a murderous maniac or a pawn, incriminated by family and foes keen to seize her holdings. Maybe both are partially true. Maybe neither is completely accurate. What we do know: Elizabeth Báthory was never tried for her crimes. The book allegedly listing 650 victims was never revealed. It is very difficult to know with any certainty how many young women Bathory killed. History has convicted Elizabeth Báthory, but the evidence? It's complicated. She's either history's most notorious female serial killer or one of history's most slandered powerful women. Or perhaps she's both, a harsh, cruel noble whose real crimes were exaggerated into legend for political and financial gain. 4 centuries later, we still don't know which story is true. And that uncertainty, that's the most unsettling part of all.